I can't tell you quite how it feels to be standing on this bima tonight, taking in those words of blessing from my two childhood rabbis, Rabbi Danziger, Rabbi Greenstein, two true Gedolei Hador, two giants of your generation, from my dear friend and partner, Rabbi Ross, from this incredible idol, Alana Arian, whose music makes me feel closer to God, to my Judaism. Thank you so much for being here. To Emily and Eleanor, my friends, my partners, thank you so much for adding your presence and your spirit tonight. Most of all, it is incredible to be embraced by each of you, this one-of-a-kind community. People, many of you who have known my grandparents, my parents, or me since I was a child, and so many of you who I have had the pleasure and the honor and the blessing of meeting in just the last 3.5 years. Thank you all so much for being here. Tonight, I can't help but think back to the very first time I spoke from this bima, 23 years ago at my bar mitzvah. I see many of you who were here with us that morning when I still spoke like this. Thankfully, my voice has gotten a little deeper. That Shabbat, I spoke about my great uncle, Marvin Ratner, who in 1967 left a lucrative partnership at what is now Baker Donaldson to found the South's first racially integrated law firm with his partner, Russell Sugarman. Their aim, in his words, in Uncle Marvin's words, was to provide services that were sorely needed in overcoming racial discrimination in housing, employment, and education, and to promote the civil rights of deprived people. My bar mitzvah speech was about his lesson that we are not defined by how much money we make, but by how much good we do in the world. A couple of weeks ago, I found for the first time his Jewish Historical Society interview in our temple archives, and I learned that Uncle Marvin was inspired towards civil rights work by the example of fellow Memphis Jew and temple member Myra Dreifus, my great-grandfather's sister-in-law. Myra founded the Fund for Needy School Children, and she made famous the phrase, "You can't educate a hungry child." This 4'10" Jewish lady, Myra Dreifus, and the movement that she inspired created Memphis's first school lunch program, which became a model for communities around the country. Historian Selma Lewis tells the story of when Myra encountered a principal hostile to her idea, who feared that providing school lunches would keep his kids dependent for life. And Myra responded, "My lunch has always been provided for me, first by my father and now by my husband. It has not made me dependent." That principal, looking at this dynamic woman standing before him, realized that he had never before met a more independent person, and he became an ardent advocate for the free lunch program. Through the example of Myra Dreifus and my Uncle Marvin, I realized the power that each and every person, that each one of us has to change the world. But we don't have to feed an entire city or make history to do so. I'm blessed to have had many people in my life who left the world better than they found it. Every day after school until I started to drive, my grandparents Phyllis and Sumner Levine, as you mentioned, of blessed memory, picked me up from school. I carry with me so many things from those afternoons and evenings spent together. I remember how Sumner, how he would so often drop me off at his house after soccer or after school and go straight to the hospital to visit people for Temple's volunteer group, God's Unfinished Business. As a kid, I remember wondering how Papa felt in that hospital, and why would someone go to the hospital if they didn't have to? Wasn't it scary? Now that I'm older, I know that was precisely Papa's point. In every hospital room lurks the precariousness of human life. It is scary. Papa wanted every person that he visited, whether they had a huge family or no family, to know that their temple family cared for them, that they were not alone. I really wish Papa were here with us tonight. He would love this. He loved this community. He loved this synagogue. Papa understood that community means to give of yourself, but somehow, as if by a miracle, to get more back in return. As rabbis of this sacred community, we stand on the shoulders of giants, not just the ones who shaped our own lives, but all the rabbis and leaders who dedicated themselves to making Temple Israel a beacon of Torah, of goodness, and of justice in the Deep South. Like Rabbi Max Samfield, who ministered to hundreds of Memphians dying of yellow fever, Jewish and Gentile, white and black, rich and poor. Like Rabbi Feinschreiber, who was a Jew in the South in 1917, took an ad out in the Commercial Appeal declaring that he was going to preach against the KKK the day after L. Persons was lynched off of Summer Avenue. Like Rabbi Wax, who in the wake of Martin Luther King's assassination led a march of dozens of ministers to City Hall, where on national TV he proclaimed to our mayor and to the world that there are laws greater than the laws of Memphis and the laws of Tennessee, the laws of God, that we must speak out in favor of human dignity for every person. Like Rabbi Danziger, who taught our community that it's okay to embrace Jewish tradition, like Hebrew, like yarmulkes, like talitot, that we can disagree without being disagreeable, who inspired my grandpa and so many others to be God's partner in completing God's unfinished business, to build community through acts of chesed and love. And like Rabbi Greenstein, who has sung Misha Berach at countless bedsides, who has tenderly comforted hundreds of people in their final moments, and stood beside those that they left behind, who has done more for this Jewish community in relation to our city than perhaps any rabbi in any city in this country. Each one of us blessed to call Temple Israel our home. We stand on the shoulders of the giants who came before. In our Torah portion this week, we read about the final covenant God makes with the Israelites before they entered into the promised land. God says, I make this covenant not with you alone, but with those who are standing here with us this day and with those who are not with us this day, which the rabbis have long interpreted to mean each of us. That the covenant was made with those who stood there that day and with each and every Jew who has ever or will ever live. Each one of us stands in that chain of tradition, stretching back to the banks of the Jordan River, back to our grandparents, our great uncles, back to every person who has taught us how to live in this world. That chain does not, and it will not end with us. We are the people who shaped us. Their goodness and their strength lives on not only in the community we inherited, but in the community that we are building together for our children, like Shoshi, and for all those yet to come. And like Lila, and for all those yet to come. Every generation of Jews has worried about what the Jewish future will bring. As Jews, and as Mimi will attest, it is in our bones to worry. But it is also true, that every generation of Jewish life has looked different than the one that preceded it. Now, that's not necessarily better or worse, it's just different. From the generation who wandered in the desert to the generation who made it to the promised land, from the generation who left Europe to the generation who became Americans, from the generation who distilled Judaism down to its social justice ideals, to the generation who felt comfortable taking our yarmulkes and our taluses and our Hebrew out of the treasure chest in our attics. Though the temple Israel of tomorrow will no doubt look different than the one we inherited, Rachel and I are proud to raise Shoshi in a community where hundreds of us gather each month for Shabbat supper clubs and for temple tribes, where religious school is actually referred to by the kids as Sunday Fun Day. It's true. And where hundreds gathered here tonight to celebrate our Jewish present and our Jewish future, where countless of you, and I'm looking at so many of you right now, countless of you devote your lives to helping the neediest in our community, to making history, and to ensuring that each and every person in our community knows they are not alone. We may stand on the shoulders of giants, but they are still with us. They are at our backs, and they would be proud of the Jewish life that we are building together, one act of justice, one act of love at a time. Shabbat Shalom.